the U.S. Navy launched a devastating assault on a $5 billion cartel fortress just 7 miles from the border. Behind 15-foot steel walls, guarded by hundreds of mercenaries and bristling with rotary cannons, the stronghold held a nightmare: 1,300 chemical drums capable of flooding America with narcotics, and over 180 women and children chained as hostages. This was no hidden smuggling den. It was a war machine built on blood and fear, designed to be untouchable. Airstrikes were impossible. A single detonation could have turned the compound into a massacre. So America's answer was surgical. 350 Navy SEALs, 95 drones, and a battle plan timed to the second. Their mission: destroy the cartel's empire, seize the chemicals intact, and bring every hostage home alive. The clock had started, and the desert was about to erupt in fire and steel. The 4th of September, 2025, 7:45 a.m. The silence of the desert outside El Paso shattered beneath the grinding roar of engines. Out of the morning haze rolled a convoy that looked less like smugglers and more like an invading army. 25 armored trucks, steel-plated and bristling with mounted guns, carved across the highway like predators on the hunt. On their roofs, 6-barreled rotary cannons gleamed in the sun, each capable of spitting 3,000 rounds a minute, enough to cut a man to ribbons before he could even blink. But it wasn't just the weapons that made this column lethal. Locked inside the cargo holds were 1,300 chemical drums, 363,000 pounds of benzyl alcohol, and 334,000 pounds of N-methylformamide. Enough precursor to flood American streets with billions in narcotics, or to craft chemical agents that could poison entire cities. Guarding this nightmare were 130 mercenaries, veterans of foreign wars, men who had sold their souls for blood money. Their destination lay just 7 miles from El Paso's neighborhoods, a fortress where more than 180 women and children were chained as human shields. If the convoy reached those walls, it would become untouchable. For America, the clock had already started ticking. By 8:20 a.m., the convoy reached its sanctuary. To the untrained eye, it looked like a cluster of warehouses buried in the desert sand. In truth, it was a fortress carved for war. 15-foot steel walls rose like cliffs, wrapped in 4 layers of razor wire. Along the perimeter stood 12 rotary cannons, each capable of drowning the air in a storm of fire. More than 200 guards prowled the grounds, rifles slung and eyes sharp, their confidence absolute. But what lay inside those walls was darker than any gun. Intelligence confirmed more than 180 hostages, women and children, ripped from border villages, some days away from being sold into human trafficking networks. Others malnourished, enslaved, guarded at gunpoint. This was not a base, it was a factory of human suffering, positioned just 7 miles from American homes. Then, at 8:27, disaster nearly struck. A U.S. reconnaissance drone drifted too close to the fortress radar. Alarms wailed. In that instant, the entire operation, 95 UAVs and 350 Navy SEALs already in place, stood on the edge of exposure. Only a desperate wave of electronic jamming saved the mission, cloaking the drone in smoke and shadows. Now I'll ask you, if one slip of technology can risk everything, how would you plan the strike to come? Because in Chapter 3, America's war machine begins to draw the battlefield like a deadly chessboard. By 8:45 a.m., the battlefield was drawn in silence. Inside the fortress, the cartel's armored convoy had merged with entrenched defenders. 25 trucks sealed behind walls, 1,300 chemical drums stacked like fuel for an empire, and a mercenary force swollen to nearly 350 fighters. They believed the fortress, unbreakable steel, firepower, and human shields, woven into one impregnable bastion. But beyond those walls, the United States had already laid its trap. Hidden beneath the desert heat, 350 Navy SEALs waited in razor-sharp formation. 50 operators were tasked with breaching and securing the hostage blocks. 20 snipers took position on distant rooftops, rifles steady, scopes tuned for targets over 1,000 yards away. The remaining strike teams were poised for brutal room-to-room combat, prepared to fight through concrete and fire. Below ground, Navy divers had already mapped drainage tunnels, alternate arteries in case steel refused to yield. Above, the air was alive with invisible hunters. 95 mini-UAVs circled at 500 feet, their cameras capturing every flicker of movement. Each carried a 12-pound precision charge, small enough to avoid collateral carnage, yet powerful enough to shred a cannon nest to ruin. Scattered across the sky, their payload equaled half a ton of C4. The plan was surgical, timed to the second. At the western perimeter, drones would strike first, pulling defenders into chaos. At that very moment, SEALs would carve open the eastern wall, driving straight toward the hostage cells. Snipers would rain precision from afar, while UAVs silenced the fortress guns. The board was set. The pieces were in place. And the storm was seconds away. At 9:15 a.m., the silence of the desert collapsed into fury. From 500 feet above, the first wave of 15 American UAVs plunged like steel hornets, their engines shrieking as they tore into the western wall. In seconds, fire ripped through the perimeter. One drone detonated against a guard tower, silencing a rotary cannon in a thunderclap. Another smashed into a munitions shed, igniting 6,000 stored rounds in a chain of savage explosions. A column of smoke climbed into the sky, black and towering, visible as far as El Paso. Panic seized the mercenaries. More than 80 fighters sprinted west, firing blindly into dust and shadows, convinced the main assault had begun. But that was the trap. At 9:17, on the opposite side of the compound, 50 Navy SEALs surged forward. Thermite charges bit into the steel wall, molten fire slicing through iron in under 20 seconds. The breach opened, and the operators poured through like a blade through flesh. Inside, the fortress quaked under the rhythm of suppressed fire. MP7 seconds barked in short surgical bursts. 11 guards dropped in the first 2 minutes, their bodies silent before an alarm could rise. Squads of 12 advanced with ruthless precision, stun grenades flashing, breaching shotguns, tearing doors apart, every movement measured to the heartbeat. Overhead, the second wave of 30 UAVs swept down. One by one, rotary cannons and heavy nests were reduced to rubble. 9 emplacements silenced in under 4 minutes. A drone pierced a fuel cache, unleashing a fireball that roared 200 feet high, bathing the compound in heat and chaos. By 9:20 a.m., the fortress that had once stood unshakable was already bleeding from its walls. The cartel's defenses, built on arrogance and steel, had begun to collapse under the storm of American fire. By 9:20 a.m., the fortress burned on its western edge, but inside the eastern breach, the fight turned savage. A squad of 12 SEALs pushed into the central barracks, where cartel mercenaries had entrenched themselves behind sandbags and overturned steel doors. The air erupted in a storm of gunfire, over 400 rounds in less than 3 minutes, ricochets sparking against concrete, hallways choked with smoke. 3 Americans were hit, one in the shoulder, another in the thigh, a third in the forearm. But none faltered. Their training was merciless, their resolve unbroken. Grenades thundered through barricades, shattering kill zones. Suppressed MP7 fire cut down defenders one by one, bodies collapsing into the dust before they could regroup. Above, the sky remained lethal. 30 UAVs dove again, ripping through defensive emplacements. 9 cannon nests were obliterated in minutes. One drone found its mark inside a hidden weapons depot, detonating crates of RPGs and ammunition in a roar that shook the compound's foundations. A second slammed into a fuel tank, painting the sky with another plume of fire. Outside, 20 SEAL snipers began their deadly chorus. From rooftops and ridgelines half a mile away, their rifles cracked with icy precision. In less than 5 minutes, 23 mercenaries were struck down, gunners falling from balconies and towers as if plucked by an invisible hand. But the cartel was not finished. Desperate to claw back control, commanders inside the fortress ordered hostages dragged from their cells. Women and children, chained and terrified, were pushed toward firing lines turned into human shields against the advancing Americans. At 9:27 a.m., the battle teetered on a knife's edge. Victory hung inches away, but so too did tragedy. The next move would decide whether the fortress became a grave for innocents or the site of their deliverance. At 9:27 a.m., the final order cut across the comms. All teams, push to the hostage cells. No mercy for anyone who stands in your way. The mission's knife edge had arrived. Team Bravo led the assault. 12 SEALs stormed the eastern warehouse, planting fist-sized explosive charges along the reinforced doors. The blasts ripped the locks apart without harming those inside. As the smoke cleared, guards staggered in confusion. In less than 40 seconds, 6 mercenaries fell to precision headshots, their rifles dropping before a single hostage could be touched. By 9:33 a.m., 62 civilians had been freed, shaken, terrified, but alive. Elsewhere, resistance hardened. Nearly 70 cartel fighters entrenched themselves in concrete corridors leading toward the second warehouse. Heavy machine guns roared, spewing 1,200 rounds in under 3 minutes. Sparks lit the darkened passageways, walls shredded by ricochets. But the SEALs pressed forward with cold discipline. Fragmentation grenades blasted choke points wide open. Suppressed fire scythed through defenders who dared hold their ground. When the smoke lifted, 29 mercenaries lay dead. Another 15 wounded and disarmed. Above, the final wave of UAVs descended. 20 drones plunged with surgical precision, striking fuel caches and weapons depots. 4,000 gallons of diesel ignited in a roaring firestorm. Crates of AK-47 seconds, RPGs, and mortar shells exploded into twisted fragments, collapsing guard towers and silencing the fortress's last heavy guns. By 9:40 a.m., the stronghold was no longer a fortress. It was an inferno, walls crumbling, fire eating through steel, defenders scattering in chaos. American snipers picked off stragglers attempting to flee, each shot hammering home the truth. The cartel's empire of blood was dying in its own fire. By 9:40 a.m., the fortress was no longer a battlefield. It was a collapsing furnace of steel and smoke. Flames clawed at the sky, walls cracked under the weight of explosions, and what had once been a sanctuary for killers now unraveled into ruin. Inside, SEAL teams swept room by room, their boots striking against bloodied concrete. The last warehouses were breached in disciplined waves. Explosives shattered doors, stun grenades blinded guards, and precision fire ended resistance before it could reach the hostages. Women and children, 182 souls in total, stumbled from darkness into the light, their chains torn away by American hands. None were lost, not one. The mercenary force, once so sure of its invincibility, lay annihilated. Nearly 320 fighters killed or captured, weapons caches turned to ash, trucks destroyed or seized. The 1,300 chemical drums enough to poison entire cities secured under U.S. control. Snipers outside the perimeter picked off the last fugitives, leaving bodies sprawled in the desert sand. At 9:45 a.m., silence returned. The fortress had been erased, its empire of fear broken apart in less than half an hour. Amid the smoldering wreckage stood America's resolve, unyielding, merciless to its enemies, yet steadfast in defending innocent life. From chains to freedom, from fire to ash, the message was carved into steel and blood. Those who traffic death across the U.S. border will find only ruin waiting for them. By the time the last shot faded on the 12th of September, 2025, the desert fortress was no more. In less than 30 minutes, America's elite had crushed an empire of terror, rescuing 182 innocent lives and seizing chemicals worth billions before they could poison the nation's streets. The cartel's stronghold, once a monument to brutality, was reduced to smoldering ruins, a warning carved in steel and blood. This battle was never just about weapons or money. It was about resolve. About proving that on the U.S. border, there will be no compromise, no hesitation, no surrender. America's enemies learned that day what the world must never forget: those who trade in human suffering will meet fire and ash. But what about tomorrow? Will this strike silence the cartels, or drive them to rise even more desperate and violent? Tell me what you think in the comments below. And if you believe America's strength must be remembered, like and subscribe so more can hear the truth.